I've learned to move quietly in this house. Not because I want to, but because life becomes quieter when everyone treats you like a burden. My footsteps are slow now, uneven from the limp I earned years ago when a fall left my right hip forever stiff. The doctor said it was normal for a woman my age. My daughter-in-law said it was embarrassing. She doesn't say it to my face anymore. She says it under her breath. Behind the kitchen door. When she thinks I can't hear. But age sharpens certain things, like the senses you use to survive humiliation. That evening had the same rhythm I'd grown used to, the clinking of glasses, the soft jazz playing in the living room, the excited chatter of guests my family desperately wanted to impress. And me, standing in my bedroom doorway like a ghost no one invited. I could hear them downstairs. Laughing. Toasting. Living. My son, Mark, had told me that morning, "Mom, we're having company tonight. It'll be a small gathering. You don't have to come down, it'll be easier for everyone." Easier, for everyone. It was always easier if I stayed hidden. Where no one could see my limp. Where no one could hear me breathe. Where no one had to explain who the old woman in the corner was. "Better if you rest, Mom," he'd said as he smoothed his tie in the hallway mirror, not meeting my eyes. "A long night will tire you." But I knew the truth. It wasn't about my comfort. It was about his pride. His wife, Clara, had once whispered to him, thinking I was asleep, "Your mother ruins the aesthetic, Mark. People think we're caring for a relic." A relic. An eyesore. A shame. Tonight was no different. I stood silently in the dim hallway while Clara floated past downstairs in her expensive heels, greeting guests with the voice of a polished host. The kind of woman who prided herself on her perfect home and perfect life, a life where I did not fit. I sat slowly on the edge of my bed, listening to footsteps and laughter echo beneath me. The walls muffled their conversations, but every now and then, a sentence slipped through. "She can't even walk properly. She's so old-fashioned. It's awkward having her sit with us." Words they thought I couldn't hear. Words that settled into the cracks of my heart. I closed my eyes and folded my hands in my lap. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad anymore. I had simply grown used to being hidden. A thump on the stairs startled me. Someone was coming up. I straightened, pulling my shawl around my shoulders. It wasn't Mark. His footsteps are heavier, impatient. It wasn't Clara, hers are sharp, like her tongue. These steps were slow, familiar, almost cautious. I frowned, trying to place them. Then came a knock on my door. Soft. Gentle. Respectful. I hesitated, then opened it. Standing there, holding a cane and wearing a weathered hat I recognized from decades ago, was George Whitlock. My breath caught. My late husband's closest friend. A man I hadn't seen in over 25 years. A man my family would proudly parade around, if they knew he was here. But he wasn't downstairs. He was at my door. "Eleanor," he said softly, tipping his hat, "I came to see you." Shock froze me. He wasn't here for Mark. Not for Clara. Not for the glamorous party. He climbed the stairs, slowly, painfully, for me. "I heard you were upstairs," he said. Hidden away, like a secret. My throat tightened. I didn't want to disturb the party," I whispered. His eyes hardened. "No, my dear. They didn't want you seen." The truth in his voice pierced the quiet like a knife. Then he took my wrinkled hand in his trembling one. "I didn't come to see your son. I came because your husband would never forgive me if I didn't check on the woman he loved more than his own life." My eyes filled. His voice softened even more. "And I came because I have something for you, Eleanor. A gift. A promise kept." "A gift? For me?" Before I could speak, he stepped inside and gently closed the door, blocking out the noise, the humiliation, and the people who preferred I didn't exist. And I warn you, he whispered, lowering himself into a chair, what I'm about to tell you will change the way you see everything, and everyone. Because the truth George carried in his trembling hands wasn't just a gift. It was a revelation my family never wanted me to hear. George lowered himself carefully into the chair by my bedside, his breath uneven but his eyes sharp, sharper than I remembered. Age had thinned his hair and slowed his movements, but nothing could dull the intensity behind those eyes. The intensity of a man carrying a truth too heavy to die with. I clutched my shawl tighter, suddenly aware of how frail and small I must look. The forgotten woman upstairs. The hidden embarrassment. George looked at me as if I were still the young bride he'd once danced with at my wedding. As if time had not unraveled decades between us. I'm sorry to show up like this, he said softly. But I needed to see you, alone. I swallowed. I'm glad you came. Truly. But why now, after all these years? His lips trembled before he answered. Because I'm dying, Eleanor. The word struck me like a blow to the chest. He didn't say it with drama. He didn't reach for pity. He said it like someone who had made peace with time but not with silence. I don't have long, he continued. A few months, the doctor says. Maybe less. I reached for his hand, and he accepted it gratefully, squeezing gently. Oh, George. I'm so sorry. He gave a small, sad smile. Don't be. I've lived a full life. But I refuse to leave this world without keeping a promise, to you, and to him. Him? I whispered. He nodded. Your husband. A tremor went through me. I came to deliver what he asked me to. Something he entrusted me with before he passed. My heart pounded as he slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. It looked expensive once. Now it looked like a relic, softened by time, scuffed by years of travel. George placed it reverently in my hands. He gave this to me the day before he went into the hospital, George said. Told me to guard it with my life, and to give it to you only when I believed you needed it the most. I stared at the pouch, my fingers trembling. But why didn't he give it to me himself? George exhaled deeply, pain flickering in his eyes. Because your husband knew your family would bury you alive in loneliness someday. He saw the way Clara treated you, even back then. He feared Mark would follow her lead. And he didn't want his gift, or his message, to fall into the wrong hands. Tears blurred my vision. My husband had seen what I refused to see. He sensed that someday I would be hidden away. Silenced. Dismissed. And he had prepared for it. Slowly, I untied the pouch. Inside was a folded letter, and a small brass key. My breath hitched. George watched me closely. Your husband didn't want you to be powerless, Eleanor. I unfolded the letter, my hands shaking. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then the people around you have forgotten the woman you truly are. But I haven't. I never will. My throat tightened. This key belongs to something that was always yours, but I feared others would try to take it from you. My fingers trembled harder as I looked at George. A key to what? I whispered. George hesitated before answering. A safe deposit box, he said. Your husband kept it secret. He told me what's inside belongs only to you, and could change the way your future looks. I felt the room spin slightly. A safe deposit box? A secret inheritance? But why didn't Mark ever mention? George cut me off gently. Because he doesn't know. And God help us if your daughter-in-law ever found out. My stomach clenched. George leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. He trusted you more than anyone. He trusted you with his love, and he trusted me to deliver the rest. He placed his hand on the pouch again. You never deserved to be hidden, Eleanor. And tonight, everything he left behind, everything he planned, is finally in your hands. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed downstairs, heavy and irritated. Clara. Her voice floated up, sharp and annoyed. George? George Whitlock? Where is he? Mark, why did you let him go upstairs? George smirked, leaning back slightly. Well, he murmured, looks like the queen of this castle knows I'm here. The doorknob rattled. My heart raced. Clara's voice sliced through the hallway. Eleanor? Open this door. Now. George looked at me calmly. Are you ready for this? Because the moment Clara burst into that room, she realized the woman she'd hidden for years was no longer powerless. The doorknob twisted sharply, rattling like a warning. Clara didn't knock. She never knocked. Eleanor, she snapped from the hallway, open this door right now. George lifted one eyebrow, unbothered. The man was facing death, yet Clara's voice seemed to annoy him more than any diagnose ever could. I swallowed hard. My instinct, honed by years of shrinking, told me to stand, smooth my skirt, brace myself, and pretend I wasn't being scolded in my own room. But then my fingers brushed against the leather pouch in my lap, feeling the weight of the key, the softness of my husband's final letter. A letter meant only for me. A letter that warned me of moments like this. I straightened my back instead. Clara burst in before I even reached the door. Her face was flushed, part anger, part horror as she saw George sitting comfortably in the chair, cane resting across his lap like he belonged there more than she did. What are you doing up here? She snapped, ignoring me completely. The party is downstairs. Guests are waiting. You're supposed to be mingling. George didn't stand. He barely blinked. I came to see Eleanor, he said calmly. Clara's eyes narrowed, sharp and venomous. Why? She doesn't. Because she matters, he cut in, steel underscoring every syllable. Clara blinked, stunned. No one had spoken to her like that in years, least of all in her own house. Mark appeared behind her, looking tired, uncomfortable, and annoyed that he had to follow her up the stairs. Mom, he sighed, like he was addressing a troublesome child, you know the guests feel awkward around you. You should be resting. Why are you entertaining visitors? My jaw clenched. George leaned forward in his chair. Your mother didn't come downstairs because you told her to stay hidden. I came upstairs because I wanted to see her. Mark stiffened. It's not like that. Clara crossed her arms. Oh please, George. Eleanor prefers quiet. She gets tired easily. This is for her good. George barked a cold laugh. Her good? You're keeping the woman who built this family hidden like a shameful secret. Clara's composure cracked, panic flickering behind her eyes. Lower your voice, she hissed. People downstairs can hear. Let them, he said. I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Pride? Strength? Maybe the ghost of a woman I used to be. Clara turned to me then, finally addressing me directly. Eleanor, she said through gritted teeth, you know how you look when you walk. People don't understand. It's better for everyone if I disappear? I asked quietly. The words were soft. But the silence that followed them was crushing. Clara's lips tightened. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Mark finally stepped forward, pinching the bridge of his nose like this whole situation was an inconvenience. Mom, please. Just come downstairs for a moment, say hello, and then return to your room. My room. My prison. Without thinking, I slid the pouch into my pocket and stood as tall as my trembling legs allowed. No. Mark blinked. What? No, I repeated. I'm done being hidden. Clara scoffed. Oh, don't be dramatic. George rose slowly beside me, leaning on his cane. If anyone is dramatic, it's you, Clara. Hiding her like she's something to be ashamed of. Clara's jaw clenched. She turned red with fury. You don't understand this family, she spat at him. Oh, but I do, George said, stepping closer. I knew this family long before you did. I knew Eleanor when she lit up every room she walked into. And you. He pointed his cane at her chest. Have spent years dimming her light so you could shine. Clara recoiled, eyes wide with the truth laid bare. And then he delivered the blow. And that ends tonight. Clara froze. Mark stared between us, bewildered, unsure whose side he was supposed to be on. George turned to me, voice softer now. Eleanor, get your coat. Clara gasped. She's not going anywhere. She needs to stay. No, I said firmly, surprising myself. You need to stay. I'm leaving. Mark stuttered, Mom, where are you going? I stepped past them both, gripping George's arm. To reclaim the part of my life you'd been trying to erase. Clara lunged forward, desperate. You can't just walk out. I stopped in the doorway and looked back, not with anger, but with clarity. I've been hidden long enough. And as we walked down those stairs together, a hush fell over the entire party, because the woman they thought was invisible had finally stepped into the light. The stairs felt different beneath my feet that night. Not heavier, lighter. As if every step I took peeled away years of silence, years of shame, years of being tucked away like an old curtain no one wanted guests to see. George descended beside me, leaning on his cane, steady and determined. His breath was shallow, but his presence felt like a wall of iron. Behind us, I could hear Clara whispering frantically to Mark. She'll embarrass us, stop her. Do something. But for once, he didn't. Maybe he was stunned. Or scared. Or maybe part of him knew that trying to contain me tonight would make him look small in front of the guests. Step by step, the laughter from the living room grew louder. Clearer. Sharper. Then we reached the bottom. The moment I stepped into the doorway of the living room, the entire party seemed to snap still, like a photograph captured mid-breath. People turned. Eyes widened. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone coughed into their drink. I stood in front of them, chin lifted, shawl draped over my shoulders, holding myself with a dignity I'd forgotten I still possessed. For the first time in years, no one looked through me. They looked at me. Clara rushed forward, plastering on a smile so fake it could have cracked off her face. Oh. Everyone. This is Mark's mother, Eleanor, she said, gripping my elbow a little too tight. Well, she usually prefers to stay upstairs. George pried her hand off me with a glare sharp enough to slice glass. She's here because she chooses to be. Not because anyone allowed her. Clara flinched as guests exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a woman in a pearl necklace, offered me a kind smile. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Harlow. We've heard so much about you. I forced a polite smile. Though I doubted Clara had told them anything beyond. She's old. She's fragile. She doesn't understand modern etiquette. She should rest. George cleared his throat loudly, drawing the room's attention. I hope you don't mind, he announced, but I asked Eleanor to join us. I came here tonight specifically to see her. To see me. Not my son. Not Clara. Me. Clara's eyes twitched as she tried to salvage control. Well, George, that's sweet, but Eleanor needs to sit. She gets tired very. George cut her off with a raised hand. No. She will speak for herself. The room fell silent. My heart thudded. And then, for the first time in a very long time, I let my voice fill a space that had excluded me for years. I'm not as weak as you think, I began softly. And I'm not a decoration you hide away. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Clara's cheeks flushed. I continued, I used to welcome people into this home with open arms. Not because it made me look good, but because I believed kindness meant something. My eyes found Clara's. She dropped her gaze. But somewhere along the years, I became a shadow in my own house. A man near the bar murmured, "That's terrible." George straightened proudly beside me. I looked around the room, letting each face settle into focus. When I was a young wife, this house was filled with laughter I created. Parties I hosted. Guests I welcomed. I never imagined a day would come when I'd be hidden like an embarrassment. Clara stepped forward, panic edging her voice. Eleanor, that's not fair. You know you get tired. No, I said sharply. I get tired of being silenced. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Then George placed a firm hand behind my back, supporting me as I took a breath. And tonight, I said, someone reminded me that being old does not mean being useless. Limping does not mean being shameful. And being quiet does not mean being unwanted. I held up the leather pouch in my hand. Tonight, I found out I'm not powerless. Clara's eyes locked onto the pouch, fear blooming across her face like a spreading stain. What is that? She whispered. But I wasn't ready to answer her. Not yet. I lifted my chin as I added. I'm done staying in the shadows. The room erupted in hushed whispers. Clara clenched her fists. Mark stared at the pouch like it contained a bomb. George leaned close and whispered. Now they're awake. And just as the room buzzed with confusion and fear, the front door swung open, and the person who entered took the entire party's breath away. The front door swung open with a force that made every head in the room snap toward it. The music stuttered. The guests fell silent. Even Clara's breath halted mid-panic. There, framed in the doorway like a silhouette cut from time, stood Margaret Whitlock, George's sister. But not the fragile woman I remembered. Not the gentle friend who once helped me decorate this very living room decades ago. No. This Margaret carried the weight of authority. Of wealth. Of someone who walked into rooms expecting them to rearrange around her presence. Her mink shawl draped over her shoulders. Her gray hair swept neatly into a bun. A diamond brooch glimmered at her collar. But more striking than all of that, were her eyes. Cold. Focused. And locked directly onto me. She stepped forward slowly, the tapping of her heels echoing against the hardwood like a countdown. Eleanor Harlow, she said, her voice firm but oddly warm beneath its steel. My brother told me everything. I swallowed, my fingers instinctively curling around the leather pouch in my hand. Clara rushed forward like a desperate hostess scrambling to regain control of her sinking event. Oh. Mrs. Whitlock. We didn't know you were coming. Margaret didn't even glance at her. Obviously, she said curtly. Clara froze, cheeks reddening. Margaret continued forward until she stood directly in front of me. Her perfume, lavender and old books, filled the space between us. It's been a long time, she murmured. I nodded, my voice shaky. Too long. Her gaze softened, but only for me. For 20 years I've wanted to check on you, she said. But your family made it difficult. The whispers in the room grew louder. Clara stiffened. Mark's mouth opened slightly in shock. Margaret didn't lower her voice. I called. I visited. I sent invitations, letters, gifts. She paused. But I never received a reply. My throat tightened painfully. Clara stepped forward, defensive sparks lighting her eyes. We didn't receive anything. Margaret finally turned toward her like a lioness sizing up a smaller creature. You're lying. Clara choked on her breath. I beg your pardon? I said, you're lying. Margaret took a step closer, her height suddenly towering. Your husband's secretary told me the truth years ago. She said she handed my letters to you. Clara's face drained of color. A murmur rippled through the guests, sharp, judgmental, hungry for scandal. Mark suddenly snapped, Mom didn't need, but Margaret cut him off with a look that could have sliced through bone. Your mother needed connection. Her voice rose, not yelling, but powerful enough to shake the room. She needed people who loved her. And you, she pointed at Mark and Clara both, decided who she was allowed to see. Who she was allowed to speak to. Who she was allowed to be. A heavy silence fell. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely breathe. Margaret turned to me again, her expression softening. Eleanor, my brother loved you more than any man I've ever known could love a woman. And he feared this exact thing. She gestured around the room at the frozen faces. He feared they would hide you, like furniture. Clara gasped. Mark looked down. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek black folder. George told you about the safe deposit box, she said gently. I nodded, clutching the pouch tighter. Well, she continued, this folder contains the documentation associated with it. He named me co-executor. And I'm here to finalize what he intended. Clara stepped forward, voice trembling with concealed panic. Mrs. Whitlock, surely this is just a misunderstanding. Whatever is inside that box should be for the whole family, not just. Margaret turned to her with a chilling smile. Oh, it is for the family. She paused dramatically. But the only family member he trusted was Eleanor. Gasps. Wide eyes. A sharp inhale from somewhere near the kitchen. Clara swayed as if she'd been struck. Mark's face paled, fear creeping in behind his eyes. Margaret opened the folder and tapped the first page. Tonight, we settle this. I felt the entire room leaning in, breaths held, hearts pounding, greed and curiosity mixing like wine and poison. Margaret looked at me with a solemn expression. Are you ready, Eleanor? I nodded, though my legs trembled beneath me. Mark whispered hoarsely, Mom, what's going on? I looked at him, really looked. At the son who hid me. At the man who forgot the woman who raised him. And for the first time, I answered with a truth he wasn't prepared to hear. Everything your father left behind, he left for me. But none of them, not even George, expected what Margaret revealed next. Because the inheritance wasn't money, it was power. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in someone's drink. Margaret held the folder to her chest, her jaw set with the calm authority of someone who had come prepared for a war the rest of us didn't know we were fighting. Clara stood rigid beside Mark, her fingers twisting together like she was trying to wring the panic out of her own skin. Behind them, the guests watched, hungry for truth, terrified of it, fascinated by the spectacle unfolding in a house they thought belonged to someone else. Margaret tapped the folder once. A crisp, heavy sound. What George left behind, she began, was something he felt Eleanor desperately needed, and something the rest of you abused. Clara swallowed. Mark looked confused, desperate, and suddenly much younger than his 40-something years. And what is that? He asked shakily. Margaret opened the folder. This house. The word sliced through the room like a knife. Clara's face was drained of color. Mark's lips parted in disbelief. Her? Clara sputtered. No, that's impossible. This house is Mark's family home. It was supposed to. Margaret shut her down with a single, sharp lift of her eyebrow. This house, she repeated, was bought by George and Eleanor. Together. It belonged to both of them. But years ago, when Eleanor fell ill and her mobility changed, she glared directly at Clara, convinced her to sign papers she didn't fully understand. Clara's face twisted. That's not true, she agreed. She didn't want the stress. No, Margaret said flatly. She trusted you. And you used that trust to take her name off the property deed. A ripple of disgust moved through the room. I felt cold. Small. Exposed. I remembered that day hazily, Clara standing over me with a stack of papers, telling me it was just to simplify taxes, that Mark would handle everything from now on, that I shouldn't worry about life's heavy burdens. And I believed her. Margaret continued, her voice now stronger. But what Clara didn't know was that George reversed those papers before he died. He put Eleanor back on the deed as the sole lawful owner of this property. Gasp stabbed through the room. Mark sank into a chair, head in his hands. Clara staggered backward like she'd been slapped. What? She rasped. No, that can't be, Mark, tell her. Tell her your father wouldn't. Margaret opened the folder and held up a notarized document. He did. I felt the air leave my lungs. My knees buckled, and George quietly steadied me with his cane pressed to the back of my leg. He wanted Eleanor protected, Margaret said softly. He saw what was happening. He saw how you hid her. How you isolated her. How you dictated when she could be seen and when she couldn't. The room murmured with outrage or shame. I couldn't tell which. Mark finally looked up, eyes hollow. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I stared at him for what felt like the longest moment of my life. Because I thought you knew, I whispered. Because I thought you were part of it. He blinked rapidly. I didn't. Clara told me she handled everything. I didn't know. Clara spun toward him. Don't you dare put this on me. You knew she was better off upstairs. She gets confused, she gets embarrassed, she gets human, Margaret snapped. And you punished her for aging. Clara trembled with anger and humiliation. Someone finally spoke up from the crowd. A man near the bar. I can't believe you treated her like that. Another voice, she raised you, didn't she? And you hit her? Another, that's cruel. Clara's face twisted, but she said nothing. Margaret closed the folder gently and turned to me. Eleanor, this house is yours. Every wall. Every room. Every key. My fingers tightened around the pouch in my hand. George wanted you to feel safe, she continued, and to know that the life you built hasn't been stolen from you. Not by illness. Not by aging. And certainly not by people who were supposed to love you. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I didn't feel like a ghost. I didn't feel like an inconvenience tucked away behind a door. I felt seen. Clara broke the silence with a bitter, trembling whisper. So what now? You're kicking us out? I turned toward her. I didn't smile. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply said the truth. Now, the hiding stops. But even with the deed in my hands, I didn't realize the true power George had left me, a secret Margaret hadn't revealed yet, one that would rewrite every rule in this house. Expected. For a long moment, no one moved. Not the guests. Not Clara. Not even Mark. Margaret stood beside me like a silent pillar of justice, the folder still tucked under her arm. George rested heavily on his cane, breathing hard but watching me with a pride that made my chest ache. The leather pouch in my shaking hand suddenly felt heavier, weighted not just with old paper and metal, but with truth. I had the house. My house. But Margaret's eyes told me that wasn't all. There's one more thing, she said gently. Clara flinched like the words were a blow. Mark straightened, fear stirring beneath his skin. I looked at her, my voice barely above a whisper. What else did George leave? Margaret motioned toward the small pouch I clutched. You've been looking at it all night, she said. Open it, Eleanor. My fingers trembled as I loosened the cord. Inside was the key I had felt earlier, and a folded, yellowed letter bearing my name in my husband's handwriting. My heart stuttered. I broke the seal. As I unfolded the letter, the room blurred behind tears. But the words pulled me back into a world where I was loved, cherished, and treated like someone worth fighting for. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, I'm gone. But I want you to know something clearly, you are not alone. My breath hitched. I saw them hiding you. I saw them dimming your light. And I knew that one day you would need to stand tall again. Clara shook her head violently. Eleanor, don't listen to this is manipulation. George turned his glare on her, lips curling into a warning. Let her read. I continued. The house is yours. Not Mark's. Not Clara's. Yours. But that is not all. I have placed full financial control of my estate, investments, and accounts under your name. Margaret will help you manage them until you feel strong enough to handle them alone. The edges of the room sharpened as I read. Clara's knees bent slightly, as if the ground was slipping from under her. Mark whispered something that sounded like a prayer, or a curse. I turned the page. You were the strength of this family long before anyone else tried to claim that title. And you are still the strongest person in this house. Never forget that. With endless love, your George. The last line broke me. Not with pain, with restored dignity. Margaret spoke into the thick silence. George left Eleanor the entire estate. Every asset. Every investment. Every account. Clara gasped, then let out a brittle laugh. That's impossible. A woman her age can't manage that, she can't even walk without. I lifted my head sharply. I can't walk without limping, I said, but I can still think. I can still decide. I can still live. Clara's lips quivered. Mark looked lost, small, like he finally saw me not as a burden, but as a mother he failed. Mom, he whispered, is there anything we can do to fix this? I studied him, the son I loved, the boy I raised, the man I forgave more times than he ever realized. He wasn't evil. Just weak. Comfortable. Blind to the cruelty he allowed. You can start, I said quietly, by seeing me. My voice trembled. Not as an embarrassment. Not as a mistake. As your mother. Mark's eyes filled. Mom. I'm so sorry. Clara grabbed his arm. Mark. Don't let her guilt you, she's taking the house, she's taking everything. No, I said firmly. I'm taking back what was stolen. Clara opened her mouth again, but Margaret stepped forward sharply. Clara, be careful, she warned. This house is no longer yours to command. Clara's face contorted with disbelief and humiliation, but she said nothing. I took a breath. A deep, steadying breath. Both of you can stay, I said at last. Clara's head snapped up. But, I added, the hiding stops. The orders stop. The cruelty stops. I will live in this home as its owner, its equal, not its ghost. Clara stared at me, stunned. Mark wiped his face. I understand. And for the first time in years, I believed him. The guests slowly began to murmur, some whispering admiration, others shame, but all of them finally seeing me. Margaret squeezed my hand gently. George smiled. And I felt myself return to life. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of a new era, one where the woman they hid behind closed doors finally held every key,